Jeremiah 15:33. Thus saith Yahweh of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together. All that took them captives held them fast. They refused to let them go. Call Halal Yahweh Bashem Abishai Bashem Rakakwatash. Double honors unto the apostles and the elders. Salutations to all my fellow laborers doing this work in truth and sincerity, risking their lives and their freedom to do so. To the scattered elect that are scattered around the four corners of the earth, that be like unto the speckled bird, the Israelite foreigners. And to the Akwath that are listening and learning, to you I say Shalom. This is your brother Malcolm from the branch of the Great Millstone here in Chicago, coming at you with another lesson in truth. All right, and I'm holding the book, The 10 Tribes of Israel. All right, the true history of the American Indians, showing that they are the descendants of the 10 tribes. All right, by Timothy R. Jenkins. All right, as you can see on the old native maps, there was Hebrew language written all over the natives, found in on their artifacts and in their the oldest Torah known to man was found among the natives. So-called natives. A group of so-called natives out on the East Coast had a copper cylinder, and inside that copper cylinder contained a Torah, which is the Bible for those of you who don't know, written in the ancient Hebrew. Well, not the ancient Hebrew, but in the Assyrian script of Hebrew, which some people erroneously and ignorantly call Aramaic. All right. Then we're also going to go into the book, The Indian Slave Trade by Alain Gillet. All right, The Indian Slave Trade by Alain Gillet, showing you that they, not only were they in the transatlantic slave trade, in a lot of cases, the so-called natives and the so-called Negroes on the same ships being shipped to different places or the same place. All right, so let's read that again. Jeremiah 50:33. And it reads, Thus saith Yahweh of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together, and all that took them held them fast. They refused to let them go. The children of Israel being the descendants of the so-called natives, and the children of Judah being the so-called Negroes, the so-called Jamaicans and the so-called Haitians, the people of the islands, of the Caribbean islands. All right, not the Africans. All right, Israelites were refugees on the west coast of Africa, living separately from Africans. Hence the reason why their maps referred to as Negro land from the 1700s. All right, and whether the forts in the different places had Hebrew names, and they were, and the so-called Negroes were victims of slavery by Africans, dark-fleshed Africans, a different dark race of people, dark-fleshed Arabs, and so-called white men. And all that is accounted right there in the Bible. You can start in the book of Joel, the 3rd chapter. But without any further ado, let's play this video and let their tongue fall upon themselves, and then I'll bring out a few historical facts and a couple more scriptures, and then we'll go from there.
Education became a universal right in 1948. For years before that, the church was advocating in favor of education. In fact, the Catholic Church took it upon itself to educate the masses. In 1859, it opened schools in Nigeria. Starting the 1880s, it operated boarding schools in Canada. In 1606, in America. Was all of this philanthropy? Not so much. These schools were built on an agenda. They were meant to break down indigenous societies, pave the way for divine-sanctioned conquests, justify colonialism, and spread Catholicism. The church killed many students in this process. Infuriating opinion? I'm only stating facts. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay.
And see, the so-called white man has a problem with facts. All right? This is an opinion. This is critical race history, not theory. And they don't want information like this to be brought forth. All right? They don't want information like this to be brought forth at all. This is in the book The 10 Tribes on page 119, and it reads, They reckon time after the manner of the Hebrews. They divide the year into spring, summer, autumn, or falling of the leaf, and the winter. Korah is the word for winter in Cherokee Indians, as with the Hebrews. The number of years by any of these four periods, for they have no name for year. They subdivide these and count the year by lunar months. Same thing that we do. All right? Or moons, like the Israelites, who also counted by moons. They call the sun and the moon by the same word, with the addition of day and night, as the sun and moon and night and sun or moon. So just like we say that the moon is a light for night, hot, nobody can land on it, and the sun is a brighter light for the day. All right, and we measure the seasons and the times and the Sabbath by the new moon, not by a day, like some Hebrew groups erroneously do. All right, the natives were keeping that tradition. All right, now we're going to go into the Indian slave trade by Alain Gallet. And this is page, well, I'm just going to show this to you. All right, show you this chart, and then we're going to continue to let her, what they were trying to erase and break from them was their Hebrew language, their tongues and their customs. All right. This is a chart, okay, table of Southern Native Americans sold to British slave trade. All right. So it's just giving you by the thousands. And these are just some of the few of the records that they actually kept. You know, you could actually pause it and get this information. All right. They said the scholars underestimated the size of the Indian slave trade for two reasons. All right. No, they just wanted to leave this history out. Okay. All of a sudden the camera goes blurry. Man, these bastards, I swear. Anyway, you got it the first time. But let's go ahead and read on page 302. All right. It says, it is impossible to determine how many Indians were shipped northward. New York's and Pennsylvania's extant shipping returns do not begin until 1713. Now remember, the slave trade started with the natives 100 years before it did with the Negroes. So the numbers are untold. Seville, Spain became the reverse slave capital of the world. They let you know that in Black Indians by the book Black Indians, which was written by Katz, I believe. That's behind me. But anyway, it says it is impossible to determine how many Indians were shipped northward. New York and Pennsylvania's extant shipping returns do not begin until 1713, and Maryland did not include imports, so they were not keeping records for 100 years of the natives, of the Gadites and the Reubenites, all right, that were being shipped into slavery. Ishkarites as well, because so-called Mexicans were native Indians too of the Americas, all right. And the slave trade started in the South, all right. The slave trade was going on during the time of Cristobal Colon. All right, so just remember that. It says, for instance, in 1715, the Royal Anne arrived in New York with a shipment of Indians and blacks. The numbers of blacks was recorded, but the number of Indians, but not the number of Indians. So there it is, man. So when we read Deuteronomy 50 and 33, you know, it's true. The tribes were and we're both in America enslaved under the same people, man. So now that we got that history out the way, let's continue to let her break down the cruelty of Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, and what they were doing, and Christians. All this was done in the name of Christianity. Okay? And now they're denying Christianity and they're worshiping science. Okay? Pseudoscience, to get people to take Vanessa and the pharmakia, which is what the real deaths are coming from.
In May, the remains of 215 children were found in Canada, in South British Columbia to be specific. These remains were of students of the Kamloops Indian Residential School. It was Canada's largest residential school. It was run by the Catholic Church. At least 500 Indigenous students lived in this school at any given time. How did some of its students die? You'll soon find out. In June, 751 unmarked graves were discovered. This time it was near the Medieval Indian Residential School. This school too was controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. How did some of its students die? In June again, the remains of another 182 people were found. This was near the grounds of a school called St. Eugene's Mission. This school too was controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. Why were human remains found in its grounds? In July, 160 unmarked graves were found. It was near the Cooper Island Industrial School. This school too was operated by the Roman Catholic Church.
Wow.
All of these were Canada's residential schools for Indigenous children. At least 70% of these schools were operated by the Roman Catholic Church. The fund came from the government. The church's responsibility was to assimilate Indigenous children into the dominant culture. How did the church do that? By destroying their cultures and languages. It began in 1883. Canada's first Prime Minister, John A. Macdonald, authorized the creation of these schools. Starting 1920, these schools were made compulsory for Indigenous children between the ages of 7 and 15. Many children were snatched away from their parents and put in these schools. What happened once they got to these boarding schools? Children were stripped of all things associated with their native culture, from their language to their religion to their long hair, a source of pride for many native people. It was cut short. They were not allowed to wear traditional clothes. They were forced to speak English
So they were stripped of their Hebrew, and they were stripped of their Hebrew clothing, their clothes with the fringes on it. Even though a lot of them were so far away from their customs, but then many of the customs they were still keeping. The Sabbaths, the new moons, a lot of them had, a lot of them refrained from pork, had multiple wives, and did many things that the Hebrews did. They abstained from being with their women when they went on their periods. They even had separate houses or teepees for their wives when they were on their cycles.
French. If they spoke their native languages, they were punished, beaten, shamed, deprived of food. Most of these children were forbidden from meeting their parents. This was their punishment for being native. These children were told that they were dirty Indians.
And Indian means savage, by the way. The same title which she wears. All right? Because they refer to her people. She's an Elamite from the tribe of Elam. All right? Also a Hebrew race of people, not the Hebrews of the chosen line, but she's an Elamite, and the so-called white man, Esau Edom, calls them Indian as well. Indian means savage. That's what the word means. All right. Now we're going to click to another video, which was put up by the beloved brother, the mighty Kawalya, from the Evanston camp, of Margaret Sanger.
Margaret Sanger was no doubt a controversial figure with disturbing views.
Now imagine, or should I say, just know that nothing has changed. Jake is still being targeted with pharmakia today. And Vanessa and her sisters, in some cases, they're trying to give you a dose of Vanessa and Victoria. All right? Which are killing people. And they're turning around and saying the opposite.
On eugenics, race, and population control. While some argue she even wanted to exterminate the black race, a figure with disturbing views on eugenics, race, and population control.
This is the grandmother of Bill Gates. So that apple didn't fall far from the tree. Bill Gates of hell, as we call him.
While some argue she even wanted to exterminate the black race, others are trying to erase that part of her past.
The Mike Wallace interview. In the eyes of some, Margaret Sanger has been a heroine. In the eyes of others, she's been a destructive force.
In her own words, Sanger pushed for a society that limited births to those she deemed fit to have children.
I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world. that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just mocked when they're born.
In 1916, Sanger opened the country's first birth control clinic. As a member of the American Eugenics Society, she advocated improving the genetic composition of humans.
So all sorts of things were used to keep Jake impoverished and in these bad positions, you know, so that they would have an excuse to implement plans like Margaret Sanger's. They were causing. Remember, in the 1920s, Jake had better neighborhoods, all right, than a lot of these well-to-do Edomites. They burned them all and destroyed them during the year of the Red Summer, all right. They went around and you know, Jake had achieved the terminus wealth behind enemy lines, built better cities than Margaret Sanger and her people. All right, the Black Belt here in Chicago, the two wondrous cities that they built in the Carolinas. Elaine, Arkansas was destroyed. Rosewood, and of course everyone knows about Black Wall Street, which was Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the two cities in the Carolinas outdid them all, and most people don't even know about those two. And the Black Belt here in Chicago was equal to them to them, but they destroyed them. So every time Jake would do well, they would make sure that they were going to destroy them. And this is a sort of history. And then they implemented plans to keep it so. Being it through their medical, like this, all right, or through policy, that because they ensured after that, because the federal FHA started operating after that, you know, and the FHA operated in a whites only mode for the first 40 plus years of its operation, allowing white families to own multiple properties and pass on properties to their children and grandchildren, while Jake struggled hardly, and all their strongholds, banks, and things like that have been destroyed, and then integrated into these systems where they were put under the authority of teachers like Margaret Sanger, which gave them second and third class education on purpose. You can see that hey, look, like the video is named, Jake has always been the target, man, and they still are today. Now what's going on? The black and browns are the issues now when it comes to certain issues medically today. All right, so they went from being the strongest people, all right, giving free labor and of course dominating in all the sports arenas and everything that they do, to all of a sudden being the weakest people. How is that so? You know, the NBA and the NFL are not they're not trying to seek out teams of all Edomite males. Every sport that Jake gets involved in, from gymnasts to hockey, they outdo their pale counterparts. All right. Hockey has been one of the, and this crazy thing is that hockey was started by so-called Negroes. When you do your research, you'll find that out. Okay? It was started by them because they were the people indigenous to the lands over there in Europe where these places started. But, you know, since they lie about and whitewash history, you would never know these things. But you have always been, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, pressed together, and you have always been the target of these Edomites. And you still are.
Controlled reproduction of different races and classes.
Why? Because Esau, Edom is weak sexually, and they don't reproduce like everyone else, and they definitely don't reproduce like Jacob does. And this was to ensure, and so this is all done completely and totally out of hate, all hidden behind science. And it still is to this day.
She advocated improving the genetic composition of humans through controlled reproduction of different races and classes. She often wrote about the issue in the journal she founded, called the Birth Control Review. In 1919, writing,
I personally believe in the sterilization of the feeble-minded, the insane, and the syphilitic.
Now we all know that Jake was being, was being inoculated with syphilis. Then they'll turn around and talk about the syphilitic. Jake didn't have syphilis when they came to the Americas. They didn't have syphilis when they came over here, Edomite bitch. You damn devil. Fuck you. Fuck your grandsons. Fuck your family. I hope you all die miserably. Salakia.
The urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the over-fertility of the mentally and physically defective.
Many point to a 1923 New York Times interview as proof of Sanger's racist motives, in which she referred to people as weeds, saying,
"It means the release and cultivation of the better racial elements in our society."
Come on, man. If it's not playing with these people's agenda, was then and still is today. And and any Jake that supports these pieces of shit, hey, that's why death by pain is coming to you too. I'm too upset to even go any further, man. Let me grab a scripture and shut this down. All right. Should have made me mad. This is Revelation 13, 9, and 10. And it reads, "If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword," all right, a needle was a sword too. "He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword." Here is the patience and the faith of the saints, all right, who are the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, and of course, are scattered among the heathen. Unfortunately, even ones that look like this bitch. All right. And these saints are patiently, which means suffering, and faithfully waiting to put to the sword those who put them to the sword, and to put to slavery those who put them in slavery. For it is written, "Call halal Yahweh by Shem Abishai by Shem Rakakodash, Wa Abba Babal, Kwam Yasharallah."